Jackson swept you off your feet only to dump you after finding out you were pregnant. He is the biological father of your daughter, Melanie. First time seeing Mr. Jackson since you claim he got you pregnant. You are meeting your alleged father face to face for the very first time today.
Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It changes everything you thought you knew. In the quiet echo of a courtroom, where words weigh heavier than silence, Judge Lauren Lake has seen more than the law can contain. She has seen tears become testimony, love become evidence, and the pursuit of truth unfold like a painful kind of grace. Every episode, every DNA test, every trembling hand holding a paper of results tells a story that reminds us, truth changes everything. This case, like many others before her bench, is not just about biology or betrayal. It's about the fragile line between law and justice, and how that line bends beneath the weight of human hearts. The courtroom becomes not merely a stage in a divorce case, but a stage of reckoning, where memory meets science, and emotion meets law. Judge Lauren Lake's voice carries the authority of law, but the empathy of someone who knows that behind every file number is a family. Her courtroom isn't just a setting, it's a reflection of society's deepest questions about trust, truth, and responsibility. And in today's story, the truth is buried beneath 35 years of pain, confusion, and unanswered questions. A man who once wore the uniform of his country stands before her, accused not of crime, but of absence. Across from him sits the woman who says he left her broken, carrying both a child and the silence of abandonment. And between them stands that daughter, now grown, haunted by a lifetime without answers. The DNA test, the small strip of scientific certainty, has become a modern cross of judgment. Some people take it in search of freedom, and others, later, regret taking it, when the truth exposes what denial once protected. Yet in Judge Lake's courtroom, regret cannot rewrite facts. The test doesn't care about memories or motives. It only tells the truth. And that truth, cold as data, final as a verdict, can shift the ground beneath everyone's feet. This is where the concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes more than theory. Here, justice isn't a paragraph in a legal textbook. It's a trembling mother pleading for acknowledgement. It's a father avoiding eye contact, caught between duty and denial. It's a daughter whispering, "Why didn't you want me?" The legal system provides the structure, the Evidence Act, the affidavits, the signatures. But the soul of the law is tested when the evidence isn't about property or money, but identity. In moments like this, Judge Lake's courtroom feels like a confessional wrapped in procedural order. And in every confession, there's an echo of celebrate recovery testimonies. People confronting their past, exposing their pain, and trying to find meaning in it. Except here, the recovery isn't from addiction. It's from deception, disconnection, and denial. The story unfolds like a real-life episode that could belong on the Divorce Course podcast, or discussed on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where legal experts dissect the moments that redefine the relationship between law and humanity. Because what's at stake here isn't just a verdict. It's the relationship between law and justice itself. One operates in statutes and deadlines. The other breathes in forgiveness and truth. When Judge Lauren Lake presides, she becomes both guide and guardian. She knows that truth can devastate, but she also knows that only truth can heal. And so, when she speaks of evidence, it isn't just legal proof, it's moral clarity. In a world where DNA is the new fingerprint of destiny, the courtroom becomes a mirror to our collective conscience. As the story deepens, the idea of adverse inference in evidence law emerges quietly. When someone fails to show up, when they avoid the test, or when they refuse to answer, silence itself becomes evidence. Judge Lake has seen it before. People running from DNA as if ignorance could preserve dignity. But the law, like time, has a way of catching up. For decades, this woman waited for the man she loved to return, and when he didn't, she raised a daughter who never stopped wondering. The The Supreme Court might write volumes about rights and responsibilities, but in this small courtroom, Lauren Lake witnesses how those principles collide with human weakness. Every sigh, every tear, every confession becomes a kind of jurisprudence, living, breathing, and deeply imperfect. It's not just a case, it's a generational wound reopened under oath. The mother speaks of love turned into loss. The daughter of childhood spent searching for a name. The man of mistakes buried under pride. And in the middle stands Judge Lake, firm, compassionate, and painfully aware that even in the presence of evidence, justice must still find its way through emotion. The DNA test has become both a symbol and a sentence. In one motion, it can rewrite decades, reshape families, and resurrect forgotten truths. This is why so many people regret taking it, because when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't just correct, it changes everything. This modern courtroom isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about truth and consequence. It's about how the law meets the human soul. The files might read Jones vs. Jackson, but what they really document is a universal story of longing, love, and the price of denial. Judge Lake's chambers, filled with transcripts and tears, could easily be the subject of adoption stories' full episodes, because every paternity case echoes the same question. What makes a father? Biology or belief? The law says one thing, the heart another, and sometimes they never agree. Through her years on the bench, Judge Lauren Lake has built a reputation not just as a jurist, but as a voice of compassion in a system too often obsessed with order over empathy. She represents the balance that philosophers once called the concept of justice in jurisprudence, where fairness requires both reason and mercy. Every story that reaches her courtroom could be a podcast, a film, or a sermon. The evidence might be paper and ink, but the lessons are timeless. They teach that truth, though painful, is sacred, that the relationship between law and justice depends not on who wins, but on who tells the truth. And yet, for many who walk into her courtroom, justice feels unreachable. They come broken by betrayal, chained by lies, or haunted by abandonment. Some cases resemble DNA test cheating stories. Others, the despair of divorce podcasts, where partners recount infidelity and fractured trust. But no matter the form, each one circles the same truth. When deception dies, freedom begins. For the military man who left 3.5 decades ago, his silence became his guilt. For the woman who raised a daughter alone, love became her evidence. For the daughter, the DNA test became her only chance at closure. It's in these intersections that Judge Lake's work transcends the ordinary. She doesn't just enforce the law, she reconciles the law with the human condition. Even the Supreme Court, in all its grandeur, cannot legislate love or rewrite loss. But in this small, bright room, a judge can do something greater. She can listen. And sometimes, that's where justice begins. As the episode unfolds, you realize this is more than courtroom drama. It's a mirror of every secret family story, every hidden truth that lingers in silence. It's not just about DNA. It's about identity, forgiveness, and the courage to face what's real. Because when the truth finally walks in, it doesn't knock. It shatters. Truth is never kind when it comes too late. For 35 years, the truth sat buried beneath silence, waiting for courage to speak. The courtroom may seem like a sanctuary for facts, but when Judge Lauren Lake takes her seat, she understands something few do. Facts are nothing without context, and evidence is nothing without humanity. The DNA test is finally complete. 3 decades of questions are about to collapse into one moment of truth. And that moment, heavy as a gavel strike, is what people both crave and fear. The same test that promises clarity can also destroy illusions. That's why so many people regret taking it, because sometimes the truth isn't a key, it's a consequence. This is the paradox that Judge Lake sees every day. She doesn't just deal with results, she deals with repercussions. The paper might read 99.999% not the father, but the pain beneath it reads something else entirely. I wish it were different. That's the unseen burden of justice. Its answers don't always heal. In law, we talk about adverse inference in the Evidence Act, how silence, avoidance, or failure to act can become its own testimony. But here, the absence isn't just legal, it's emotional. When a man disappears from a child's life, the silence becomes louder than any lie. The law may call it neglect. The heart calls it abandonment. The military man in this case believed distance would erase doubt. Instead, distance carved doubt into permanence. For decades, his absence became an unwritten confession. And now, standing before Judge Lake, his old choices return, not as accusations, but as evidence. Every sigh, every tear, every withheld word becomes part of the record. This is what makes the Divorce Course podcast or the Game Changing Attorney podcast so powerful when they talk about paternity and moral law. Because these stories reveal that law isn't just written in statutes, it's written in people, in how they choose to face their truth, in how they rise or refuse to. Judge Lauren Lake often reminds the courtroom that truth changes everything, but she also understands that truth alone isn't enough. It needs accountability. It needs compassion. Without them, truth becomes punishment, not progress. That's where her work transcends the Supreme Court's cold corridors. In her courtroom, justice breathes. It feels, it forgives. She embodies the relationship between law and justice, a balance between reason and mercy that philosophers from Aristotle to Rawls called the soul of jurisprudence. When the DNA results are revealed, the courtroom air turns to glass. You could hear a heartbeat between words. You are not the father. It's not just a statement. It's an earthquake. 35 years of hope fall silent in an instant. The woman, who built her life on belief, feels her world collapse. The daughter who came for answers finds only emptiness. And the man, who denied for years, suddenly wishes he hadn't been right. The truth changes everything, but it doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just rearranges the pain. Judge Lake pauses, her silence deliberate, reverent. It's the kind of silence that holds empathy, not judgment. Because in this courtroom, she knows justice doesn't end with results. It begins with what comes after. What will you do with this truth? That's the real question. That's where the concept of justice in jurisprudence evolves into something spiritual. Justice isn't only about outcomes, it's about transformation. It's not about who wins, but who learns. The DNA test has done its job, but the human heart must still decide what to do with the information. For the daughter, the test isn't closure, it's clarity. She finally understands that her father was never who she thought he was. But in that understanding comes liberation. She can now build her identity not on assumption, but on truth. For the mother, the truth becomes a mirror of her mistakes. She realizes that love without honesty is a fragile lie destined to break. Her tears are not only of loss, but of repentance, a confession that she held on too tightly to a dream that wasn't real. For the man, guilt finally becomes visible. He says little, but his eyes carry the weight of 35 years. For him, the test is not a revelation, but a reckoning. He learns that denial is not defense, it's destruction. Judge Lake understands all of this, even as she maintains composure. To her, this case isn't an anomaly. It's a reflection of how truth and law intertwine, often painfully. She has presided over countless DNA test cheating stories, each one a meditation on human weakness and hope. And yet, in each, she finds the same truth, that the law can establish paternity, but only the heart can create family. This distinction is vital in her philosophy. It's what separates justice from jurisprudence. Jurisprudence defines justice as theory. She defines it as empathy applied. It's what makes her courtroom feel less like a trial and more like a transformation. That's why her presence resonates with audiences far beyond her bench. People hear her voice and think of Celebrate recovery testimonies, stories of redemption, of people who finally faced their truth and found freedom. Each case in her courtroom becomes a modern testimony of recovery, not from addiction, but from avoidance. The addiction to denial, to self-deception, to the safety of lies. It's no wonder so many of these cases go viral or are revisited in podcast episodes that explore the moral and legal dimensions of family law. Because what unfolds here isn't just personal, it's universal. Everyone has a truth they're afraid to face. Everyone has a moment when they must choose between comfort and honesty. And then there's the shadow of child support, a word that turns love into obligation, an obligation into resentment. Judge Lake often reminds parents that financial support is not a gift. It's justice in action. The Supreme Court might phrase it as legal duty, but she phrases it as human decency. You can't claim love without responsibility, she once said, and you can't claim justice without truth. The man in uniform had signed papers years ago to claim benefits for a child he doubted was his. That signature became his chain, a document that followed him like a ghost. What he once signed for money became a lifelong reminder of moral debt. That's the hidden cruelty of paperwork. It preserves what people wish to forget. But in this courtroom, signatures aren't symbols of guilt. They're lessons in consequence. The Evidence Act calls it acknowledgement. Judge Lake calls it accountability. Her role is not to condemn, but to confront. She doesn't shame. She awakens. When she speaks, it's with the tone of someone who knows that truth and mercy can coexist, that evidence can coexist with empathy. It's this duality that makes her not just a judge, but a voice of restoration. The emotional impact of these cases lingers long after the episode ends. Viewers, listeners, and even podcast hosts revisit them in the Divorce Course podcast, analyzing what went wrong and what could have gone right. They ask questions not only about paternity, but about human nature itself. Why do people run from truth? Why do they confuse pride for strength? And why do they only seek justice when pain becomes unbearable? This is where Judge Lake's courtroom becomes a classroom. Every case becomes a lecture on responsibility, a sermon on honesty, a reminder that justice isn't about revenge. It's about revelation. The man's face, the mother's tears, the daughter's quiet nod. These are not scenes of defeat. They are fragments of awakening. The DNA test may have shattered one illusion, but it built something greater, understanding. And understanding, in the eyes of Judge Lake, is the first step toward true justice. Through her calm authority, she illustrates the living spirit of jurisprudence. Not the kind found in libraries, but in people, the kind that acknowledges that every judgment, every sentence, every verdict carries both weight and grace. She understands that law without love becomes tyranny, but love without law becomes chaos. The balance between them, that's where she stands. Her bench becomes an altar of accountability, not because she preaches, but because she listens. The truth, painful as it is, becomes sacred under her gavel. And every time she declares a verdict, she reminds the world that justice isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about making something right. This philosophy resonates through podcasts, radio shows, and legal circles. On the Game Changing Attorney podcast, experts discuss her impact on redefining courtroom empathy. On the Divorce Course podcast, relationship coaches dissect her words about love, honesty, and legal closure. Her courtroom is more than televised reality. It's modern morality in motion. And yet, beyond the fame and the cameras, Judge Lake remains grounded in one principle. That truth, no matter how late it arrives, is never wasted. Even the hardest truths have the power to heal when faced with integrity. For every couple who walks into her courtroom, broken by betrayal or blinded by pride, she offers a lesson that outlives the verdict. You cannot rebuild what you refuse to face. The military man, the mother, and the daughter all walked out changed. The law had spoken, but more importantly, they had spoken to each other, maybe for the first time honestly. That, in Judge Lake's eyes, is victory. Not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind that mends hearts. And so, the gavel falls. Not as an end, but as an invitation to begin again, to live truthfully, to understand that justice isn't the absence of pain, it's the presence of truth. Truth is a strange companion. It can break a family apart, yet in that breaking, it can also make room for healing. When Judge Lauren Lake lowers her gavel for the final time in a case, it's never simply about legal closure. It's about spiritual completion. She knows that law alone cannot bind the human heart, and that the real work begins once the cameras stop rolling, once the transcripts are sealed, and once the parties return to lives forever altered by the truth they came seeking. This is the nature of justice, not as the courts define it, but as the soul experiences it. It is not a verdict, it is a mirror. It shows us what we have become and what we must face to become whole again. For many who appear before Judge Lake, that mirror is a DNA test. It looks small, almost harmless, a sheet of paper bearing statistics and signatures. But within those numbers lie the collapse of illusions and the resurrection of reality. Some say science has no emotion, but in this courtroom, every decimal point carries decades of tears. There's a saying in legal philosophy that the law is not meant to comfort the guilty. It's meant to correct. But in the space between correction and compassion lies the relationship between law and justice, the delicate balance that Judge Lake has come to embody. Her courtroom is not just a space for rulings. It's a sanctuary for revelation. In her own words, you cannot heal what you continue to hide. And in that simple truth lies the essence of the concept of justice in jurisprudence, the understanding that justice begins when pretense ends. This case, the military man, the woman he left, the daughter he never knew, will echo for generations. It's not just a story of paternity. It's a story of courage. The courage to face truth even when it hurts. The courage to forgive even when there's no apology. And the courage to begin again without bitterness, without denial, without lies. Judge Lake understands that in every case, there are two stories. The one the evidence proves, and the one the heart must accept. The Evidence Act governs what the court can admit, but what the heart can endure lies beyond legislation. In moments like this, her courtroom becomes a living reflection of Supreme Court wisdom, that justice is not mechanical, it's moral. Her judgments are often discussed in the Game Changing Attorney podcast, where attorneys analyze not just her rulings but her demeanor, the way she blends discipline with empathy, logic with humanity. Legal experts often say she bridges the gap between the cold clarity of law and the warm reality of life. That bridge is where people rediscover their dignity. When the results came in, and the military man was found not to be the father, something unexpected happened. Instead of victory, there was silence. Instead of triumph, there was transformation. The daughter, though heartbroken, finally had something solid to stand on. Truth. For the first time in her life, the shadow of doubt that followed her since birth was gone. Pain replaced uncertainty. But pain, unlike confusion, can heal. That is what Judge Lake has always emphasized. Truth changes everything. It may not fix the past, but it frees the future. The woman who once begged for acknowledgement now had closure. The man who denied now carried the burden of honesty. And the daughter who lived in the in-between could finally live in the real. In the world of podcasts like the Divorce Course podcast, these moments are studied not just as legal outcomes, but as lessons in human behavior. Why do people hide from truth until it's too late? Why do they trade honesty for comfort and comfort for regret? Why do people regret taking the very DNA tests that could have given them peace years earlier? The answer, as Judge Lake often implies, is fear. Fear of losing control, fear of facing consequence, fear of change. But in her courtroom, fear has no jurisdiction. Only truth does. Her philosophy draws heavily on both law and psychology, echoing theories of restorative justice and the classical concept of jurisprudence that defines law as a moral science, not just a mechanical one. She knows that people enter her courtroom seeking legal resolution, but leave needing emotional redemption, and that redemption often comes not from the gavel, but from grace. Her cases have become living celebrate recovery testimonies. each one revealing how truth, once faced, becomes the first step toward freedom. The man who refused to acknowledge his child learns humility. The woman who lied learns courage. The child who waited learns strength. It is, in essence, the modern reflection of ancient moral law. That truth, once hidden, will always find its way into the light. But Judge Lake's work doesn't stop at paternity. She often handles cases of custody, child support, and family restoration, where love and law wage their eternal war. In those moments, she reminds everyone in the room that money is not a replacement for morality. A father's financial duty is measured in dollars, but his moral duty is measured in presence. The law can enforce the first. Only conscience can enforce the second. Her rulings resonate with the echoes of higher jurisprudence. Decisions that could sit comfortably beside those of the Supreme Court, because they do not just interpret statutes, they interpret souls. She treats each case as a moral education, a living demonstration of how the law must evolve to meet the human heart, and she is not alone in this mission. Across podcasts, talk shows, and legal platforms, scholars and advocates analyze her approach. On the Game Changing Attorney podcast, experts discuss how her emotional intelligence